everybody, and welcome back to another episode of The Designated Designer, a podcast about design where curiosity is the compass, creativity lights the way, and transformation is just part of the trip. I'm your host, Jennifer Stank, your brand spirit guide for this wild, wonderful ride where we navigate our creative existence in today's modern and conventional world. Today, I am so excited that we are joined by a very special guest, the one, the only, the lovely Liz Mosley, owner of her own design business and host of Building Your Brand, your own podcast. And I'm very excited to have her with us today because honestly, this has been such a surreal dream to be able to have her here on my very own podcast because you have been such an incredible source of inspiration. You and Robin both, with the podcast that you have created and done, have really given me a source of inspiration that somebody like me can do it too. So I'm very excited to be sharing you with my audience today. And do you want to just give everybody a brief introduction of who you are and what you do and how you do it?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for having me. And yes, I'm a huge believer in anybody and everybody can do this if they want to. But yeah, so I'm a branding designer. I'm based in the UK. I mainly work with small business owners out of preference and choice. But I also do lots of other things as well because I think like a lot of designers, I just find lots of different things interesting, and I have realized that I like expressing my creativity in lots of different ways. So branding is the main way, but hosting a podcast I find really fulfilling, also doing public speaking, teaching workshops. So I do all of these different things. It all comes under the banner of sort of helping small business owners feel more confident about their branding. So whether I'm doing their branding for them or whether I'm teaching them about branding, that is my overarching goal for everybody that I sort of encounter.
That's incredible. And how long have you been doing it on your own?
Oh, good question. I actually started freelancing while I had a 9-to-5 job. So I would say freelancing for like well over 10 years, but kind of in this current format of my business, I think it's been about 6 years now. It was after I'd finished my maternity leave with my second kid and she just turned 7. So 6 years ago.
That's so wonderful. Wow. So I want to just dig right into it because I feel like anybody that's listening to this specific episode is going to be itching to know. I really want to talk about your design podcast and how that's kind of impacted your career path and made connections, and it became this networking tool almost. And I really want to talk about the power of that because for me personally, when I started freelancing, and I've only been doing this 2 years, a lot of the pressure in this new up and coming generation comes from social media. And a lot of people are like, you got to put reels up, you got to put carousels up, you know, the algorithms are changing and you have to be on social media to be a success. And I use quotation marks around that because for me, I really struggled with social media. And when I got into this industry and I started to do the freelance thing and I saw all of these people were making such a huge success of themselves through reels and carousels and TikToks and Instagram and all that stuff, I tried it. But it just wasn't working for me. And I really felt discouraged. I really felt like I was doing something wrong. And I didn't know how else to get myself out there. And that's when I discovered your podcast and Robin's podcast. And that really kind of made me think like, oh my gosh, maybe Instagram isn't the only answer. Maybe there are other outlets and avenues I can explore to help get myself out there that I don't absolutely hate. Because for me, putting together a reel and doing carousels, it felt so forced. And I really struggled with that. It got to a point where I didn't want to do it. I was procrastinating on putting out content. And then this podcasting idea came to me and I experimented with it. I was like, let me just get a mic and start recording episodes no matter how bad they sound and see what happens with it. And it quickly became, as soon as I start bringing guests on, it was so fulfilling. I enjoyed it. I looked forward to it. I can get content out of it, clip together these little reels and use it in unique and different ways. So I really wanted to kind of pick your brain about what that looked like for you.
Well, to encourage you about the social media thing, it took me, I think it was over 10 years to get to 10K on social media. So, like, I was an early adopter, obviously not all social media, I'm talking about Instagram specifically. I was like an early adopter of Instagram. And, you know, back in the day where people used to share their breakfast, like very millennial sharing of like breakfast with filters and all that kind of thing. And it took me a really, really long time, I think, to find the sort of content that I wanted to make and how I wanted to show up. So just to like encourage you, you're like that, I think is a pretty normal experience, that it takes a long time. But I totally agree with you. I think one of the things that I've realized is that when I do things in my business that I really enjoy and that fulfill me, they just feel so much easier. Like they just flow, they're easy. Like it doesn't feel like this chore or this burden or this thing that I should, in inverted commas, be doing in my business. And so podcasting, it sounds like very similar to you, like was definitely that for me. I suddenly, I kind of started on a bit of a whim. Like I often joke about how I just do things because I feel like I want to, and then I almost like put the strategy in later on. So at the start there was like zero strategy, and then I was like, oh, actually I can see how this is really beneficial to my business. But I started it. I've been doing my podcast now for 4.5 years, I think it is. It'll be 5 years next February, and so I've been doing it for a long time, and I just really enjoy it. And there's been so many benefits. I think one of the things that is difficult about podcasting is that it is a really slow burn. And so you have to be consistent with it and carry on with it for a while, I think, before like you see huge results, unless you're kind of famous somewhere else beforehand. And then obviously, you know, you can take a sort of ready built audience straight over to your podcast. I didn't have that, so it did take a while for it to grow. And I think, you know, to your point about social media, like you're still showing up there, but now you have the podcast as the vehicle to make the content, and that feels less, I would imagine it feels less jarring, doesn't it? Because it's sort of coming out of the podcast, which you love, and so then it's just like a natural way to repurpose, to share the podcast, so it probably feels less forced. But yeah, I have a similar experience. I mean, I do enjoy social media. I do enjoy making reels and carousels, but a lot of my content is podcast content, so it just makes it easier to create consistently.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more, because for me, it was really difficult to figure out, you know, the ideas. Some people are incredible, like CJ and Robin are just so incredible at writing this script and telling this narrative through the reels that they post. I respect them both so much for it, and so many other amazing creatives doing it. But for me, I really struggled with that. You know, it was kind of hard to put it together and then make it feel natural. I feel like because they have so much practice, you know, their reels weren't amazing straight out the gate. Nobody's will be. And for me, I always really struggled with not being great at something straight away. That always just killed me. Like I always wanted to be amazing at it, like straight away, but that's just not how it works. So it's hard when you see these people doing it so well, and then you think, you know, what am I doing wrong? Why does it feel like I'm so awkward in front of the camera? Because it took them time to get past their own awkward phase. And sometimes I get hung up in that. And with the podcast, it felt like this safe way, because I was just doing the solo episodes. You know, the first, I'd say 10 to 15 episodes I put out, I was just doing solo episodes, and I was just kind of having this dialogue with myself, talking about my actual feelings. It didn't feel like I had to write a script or perform for an audience. I was just being so authentic in those first however many episodes. And it was rough and it was raw, and, you know, I messed it up, and there were parts that were clipped out and all that stuff. But for some reason, for me, that felt a lot less stressful than trying to do it on social media, because you could choose to post it or not. And you can kind of do the same thing with reels and carousels and things like that on social media, where you can kind of just make content and not post it. I know Robin's talked about that a lot, and I love her for that. But for me, I don't know why the podcast just felt better. And then as soon as I start bringing guests on, it was just incredible. And Robin was the one that actually showed me you can repurpose it into reels. because I had the amazing opportunity to be on her podcast, Brand Your Brain. And when she had shared a reel and like tagged me in it, I was like, you could do that? What? And it changed everything for me. So yeah, I'm really glad that you kind of feel the same way. The next thing I wanted to ask you about is how you use your podcast as this incredible networking tool, because you recently talked about it on your social media where you were kind of reflecting on your journey through your podcasting ventures and how you kind of use this as a networking tool to meet creatives in the industry and have these unique conversations and talk to these people that you really never thought you would be able to. So do you want to tell us a little bit how that went?
Yeah, sure. I mean, again, like that wasn't really something that I considered when I started it. I had this inkling that I would enjoy chatting to people about all different things around branding. And I very much went into it with kind of like a selfish perspective of, oh, I want to learn about this topic. So I'm going to go and find who I think would be, the best person to talk to about this. And so I kind of plodded along that way. And then I guess I got up the courage to ask bigger and bigger named guests, sort of like more famous guests to be on the podcast. So one of them was, I met Annie Atkins, who is a graphic designer who does a lot of work in film. So a lot of stuff for Wes Anderson's films. Anyway, she was doing the keynote at an Adobe conference that I was at. And I happened to bump into her and we got chatting and she was like, oh, I should come on your podcast. And I was like, oh my goodness, yes, please. And so that, I guess, gave me the confidence to then go and ask other people. So people like Jessica Hish, who I have literally like admired her work since I started out in the design industry. Like I followed her career for a really long time. I had an artist on called Lisa Kongdong, who again, I'd followed her on social media for like well over a decade and really loved her work. And all of a sudden, these people were saying yes to me and I was getting to have, a conversation like this where you sit down for an hour and you just ask them whatever you want to ask them. And I think, going back to what you were saying about how podcasting felt safer to you, like I think there's a real intimacy there because it, like you can't see the people who are going to be listening to it. So it really does feel like this personal, intimate thing. And I think it feels the same when people listen to it. It's like they're listening in on a conversation. And there's just something that does feel safer about that and feels a lot more relaxed, I think, as a form of content. And like you say, it gets, it'll be edited. So if you slip up, it's not the end of the world. But yeah, so started having these guests on and then I guess really realized that when you have like an hour-long conversation with someone, like that's actually a lot of dedicated time to talk to someone. And there's a kind of intimacy that's created there, like a relationship that's formed. And like, that's not to say that I keep in touch with like every single guest that I've ever had on, but most of them, I feel like I could totally drop them a DM or ask them to collaborate with me in another way or ask their advice about something. And I suddenly realized that I'd sort of created this network of people who like knew who I was now because I'd had this conversation. So like another one who I am a huge fan of is Meg Lewis, and I bumped into Meg at a conference and I could chat to her and be like, hey, it was so great chatting to you on the podcast. Like there was like an immediate sort of connection there because we'd already spoken on the podcast before. So that's been incredible. And like I said, like it wasn't like a strategic thing on my part. Like I wasn't like, oh, I'm going to have guests because that'll be really great for networking. But as I reflected on it, I was like, this is the best networking tool I've ever experienced. Like even better than at a conference, because at a conference, like, yeah, you get to chat to people, but often it's sort of like a 10-minute snippet here. There's lots going on. They're maybe distracted by other things. Whereas this is like a dedicated time slot to sit down and talk to someone. And loads of other incredible things have come off the back of having a podcast. I think it's created connections for me with my guests, but also conversations and connections through people who listen to the podcast and recommend me for opportunities. I think it's a really good way for people to get to know you. We always talk about that kind of like, how do you show your personality? How do you get people to know the person behind the brand? And like, yeah, there's an aspect of like that sort of polished content that you put out. And I'm not saying that podcasts aren't polished, but because it's a conversation, it just feels more relaxed and it feels more real, and so I think people really feel like they can get to know you much better that way. So like networking in that sense as well, even just with people who listen to it, has been amazing.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. I think you're so right in saying all of that, because for me, I really started to focus on networking this year in business. So my first year in business, I was getting all of my leads from social, whether it was social media in the sense it was Instagram or Dribble or wherever I was present. I got a lot of my leads from online. And year 2 in business, as everything kind of started to grow and more design accounts were popping up and more people were getting on Dribble, I started to really notice a slowdown in my leads, and I started to look at other avenues. And one of the things that I looked at is a local chamber of commerce where small businesses join. That was the first thing that I did, because there was a free event close to where I live, and it was just free to the public, and they were raising awareness, like if you would want to join the chamber. So I went. I was like, what's the worst thing that could happen? I just get shy and I don't get any work. Like, that's not the worst thing in the world. So I went, and I had been stalking this one local business close to me for a while, CJ's Heating and Cooling. I really like to work with tradesmen. So the people that come into your home and they do the plumbing and they do the air conditioning and they put a roof on, because oftentimes these businesses are run by really dedicated people. Oftentimes they've inherited it through grandfathers and grandfathers, and they're very serious about what they do. But the problem is they often fall short when it comes to design. They're not the boutiques or the plant shops or the ice cream parlors that usually have really nice branding. Typically, it's really rough. And I love to work with them because they're so passionate and driven. So there was this one particular business close to where I live, and it's CJ's Heating and Cooling. And I drove past this business every time between like living here and then my parents' house. I would drive past it all the time. And I'm like, I love them. They're going to be my next client. And I said this for like a year. I swore I spoke it into existence. So every time I drove past, I was like, these are going to be my clients. These are going to be my clients. And then this networking event happened, and I was sitting down with all of these local businesses, and surely enough, there was somebody sitting there with a CJ's Heating and Cooling shirt, and it was the owner. And I felt like I was so excited for this moment, and I ran up to them. I was like, I'm your biggest fan, because that's just my personality. And I said about how passionate I was about their experience in the industry and how much they care about their customers and how they deserve a brand that reflects that part of who they are. And they were just so thrilled that they had somebody that cared so much about them, that they were actually looking for a design. They had been kicking the idea around for a while, and it was just the total right timing. So that was the first moment for me that I really realized the power of networking beyond just social media bounds, and this in-person, intimate, the kind of setting that a podcast allows. I had that in real life, and I joined the chamber because I got that job, and it more than paid for itself. And after that, I joined one of the business networking international groups. We're a Zoom group, and we all get together, same thing. You know, we're kind of trying to pass the referrals and get word out there. And at that point, I understood the power of networking, and that translated into the podcast then, where I saw your reel where you were talking about how you get to meet all of these really great people in the industry, have these intimate conversations, and that in and of itself is a networking tool. So I really pivoted year 2 in business away from focusing on the social media. While it's still very important, and a lot of creatives get all of their work from there, for me it just wasn't working that way. So I really wanted to raise an awareness where everybody's business is different. Everybody's business is unique to them. Everybody's going to run their design business differently. So if a source of leads is working for one of your friends and it's not working for you, don't be afraid to try different things. Because for me, in-person networking works great because of my personality. I run up to people with bright eyes and a bushy tail, and I'm so excited to see them, and that really draws people in. But some people are more shy and closed off. They might be more personable online. So I always just like to say, you know, if there's something that's working for somebody that's not working for you, don't be afraid to try other things.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that is one of the things that I love about working for myself. And I think why I would struggle to work for someone else again, because I get to build the business that I want to build, and I get to build it around like what I know of myself and my personality. And I think like you, I well, I don't know if you are, but I am an extrovert. Like I enjoy chatting to people, like that sort of human interaction is something that I really enjoy. And so, yeah, for me, networking, and like I know a lot of people get the ick about just the thought of networking. And I honestly think it needs a rebrand, because actually it is just cultivating relationships with people, and then in a very natural way. And then if you've got a way that you can help each other, then that just like naturally comes out of the relationship that you've already formed. I think where it is horrible is when people are only interested in you for what you can do for them. They're not interested, like in a more holistic picture of like who you are as a person. But I think most people go into it like really authentically. They're just really interested in people, and they want to, support other businesses and be supported in their own business. And so I think that's where networking works really well. But I think, like you say, it's not going to be the same for everybody. Like there's so many factors that impact what is going to work in your business. So, it could be the niche that you're in. It could be, or I think you say niche in America, the niche that you're in, like where you are located. Some places have more networking opportunities than others. And then your personality, like I know for introverts, being able to show up on social media and do sort of educational carousels feels much more comfortable, for example. And I think there's just so many different ways to do it. And it does really wind me up when you get coaches or business mentors or people online who are very sort of one-dimensional in the advice that they give. And I get that there's, probably a strategy there, and that probably works better in terms of calling people in. But I just think it's really important to remember that if we're all different and our businesses are all different, and like you say, one thing that is working for your best friend might not work for you, and you get to work out what is going to work well for you, and you have to like roll with it as well. Something that worked what worked for you in year one didn't work for you in year two, and so you had to adapt and change and grow and try something new. And I think like that's such a huge and important part of running a business, is being able to pivot and move and change as everything around us changes as well.
Such words of wisdom right there. I mean, that truly is the core of it. If you're not willing to kind of pivot and change and move with the flow, I look at it like a river, and I'm on a kayak. You kind of have to go with the flow of the river and the bends and the curves and all of that kind of stuff, because for me, it shocked me how much change I had to experience, both personally, like in my own personal self-development. I think running a business really forces you to take a good, hard look in the mirror and understand who you are as a person, where you're strong, where you're weak, how you can work with your weaknesses. Because I think there's never going to be a point where you could just get rid of them and throw them in the trash. So you kind of have to learn to work with your weaknesses, whether that means you're shy and introverted and you're going to do more of the educational carousels and things like that, or you're extroverted, but you might not have such a good way of speaking, where maybe you kind of take over that conversation and you struggle with listening. Because for me, when I started my podcast, it's how I grew up, it's how I was raised. I was always raised to just kind of talk over people. I don't know why. That's just how my parents are. Like going home and being around my parents now as an adult, you can kind of see those tendencies in your childhood self. And for me, when I went to college and I went to university to learn about design and all that kind of stuff, and even early on in my business, like I would say my first 6 months doing this myself, I'd get on these calls with clients and I would just want to talk over them. And I would just want to assert my opinion. And I think we should do this. And when I go back, because I used to record all of that, every client call I've ever had, I recorded, not only to have a record of what was discussed, but to assess myself. And I think a lot of creatives really don't look at it that way. So I was kind of watching how I spoke, watching how I talked, and I noticed, wow, you're really kind of asserting yourself in this situation, and you're talking over them to a point where that's not being well received. And when I started my podcast and I had my first couple guests on, I noticed I was doing the same thing. And it really forced me to kind of look in the mirror and be like, this is a bad tendency, and to learn to listen more than I talk. They say you have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. So that was a big thing. And just the personal growth and development in yourself, in your own persona and then having to translate that to a business and being willing to grow and change and move and maneuver is just so, so important. I can't stress that enough.
Yeah, I really resonate with all of that. And I feel like I've seen memes about this, and it's definitely been my experience. Like having your own business is almost like being forced to do therapy constantly because you're confronted with yourself all the time, like the good things and the bad things. And I think the business owners who succeed quicker, I was going to say, I'm not sure if that's the right way to put it, but I think that there's a real power in being able to do what you did, which is to be critical of yourself, not in a horrible, harsh, doing yourself down, but in a very positive, like, okay, how can I make this better? How can I do this better? And I think so often, a lot of us, myself included, are very insecure about certain aspects about ourselves, and we just don't want to look because we don't want to see what's there. But if you don't look, then you are not equipped with the information that you need to make the positive changes and to make improvements. And so getting comfortable with like critiquing how you do things and being willing to like take feedback and advice and like improve things, I think is so powerful. And one of the things that really helped me, there's a massive podcast which you might have heard of in the UK called Diary of a CEO, and it's hosted by Stephen Bartlett. And I'm not like a massive fan necessarily of the content of the podcast, but one of the things that he always talks about is how they fail really, really quickly. And he has someone on his team who's called head of failure, and their job is literally to they're trying to fail as fast as possible. And we so often think of failure as this really negative thing, but the way they are framing it is that the quicker you fail, the quicker you get to the better, improved, more polished version, let's say, because you had to go through all the failures to get there. And I think so often we have this fear of failure, and we can chat about this if you want to, but like I did a rejection challenge in my business, and that was the same thing. It's kind of like, how do you speed up that process of getting through those failures, those rejections to get to where you want to go? And so the people who are willing to be uncomfortable, who are willing to look at themselves critically, who don't get knocked down by the failures, but use the failures to propel them forward, I think those are the ones that are going to get where they want to go faster.
That is so well said. And I would love to talk about this rejection challenge, since you are the queen of the rejection challenge. And actually, to everybody listening, the reason that we are having this conversation right now and you are gracing your ears with it is because this was part of a rejection challenge for me. I had asked all of the people I really look up to in the industry to be on my podcast, and some of them said no, and some of them said yes, and the lovely Liz Mosley said yes. So that is why we're here today. And I really did want to ask about your rejection challenge and what that looked like and how that helped you kind of propel your business forward. Because to me, I think there's power in the statement where you were talking about failing faster and how you can use that as fuel, because I look at it like a slingshot. The failure initially feels like you're going backwards, but you don't realize you are on a slingshot. So that initial backwards pull is going to launch you so much further than you think it's going to. So I would really love to hear about how that kind of worked for you in your business.
Yeah, I mean, that is a brilliant picture. I am going to remember that, because I think, yeah, so often you have to have that duality. You have to have the going backwards and the going forward, or the, like the low points and the high points. There's so many cliches about journeys and paths and all this kind of thing, but you need to have both, I think, to really appreciate when things are going well. But yeah, so the rejection challenge, it all started, again, I would credit the podcast to this as well. I, like you, was inviting people to be on my podcast. I asked this guy called Christo to be on my podcast, and he said no. And it was fine, but I felt kind of like a bit over the top, like emotional about it. Not emotional, as in not that I was like crying or anything, but I think I felt really embarrassed that I'd asked him and he said no, even though nobody else knew about it. And I sort of, moved on. But I realized that it impacted me because I was thinking about another person I wanted to invite on the podcast. And I can remember so clearly the thought process in my head, which was, oh, I'm not going to do that because it didn't feel good when Chris said no before. And so I suddenly had this light bulb moment where I was like, oh my goodness, this is like stopping me from doing what I want to do in my business, from asking those people. And I was like, why is it such a big deal? And a friend of mine had done a similar challenge. So this is definitely, I can't take credit for the concept of the rejection challenge, but a friend of mine she called it a no thank you challenge, which is so much nicer and friendlier, and so like British, I think, to be like, no thank you. But she had done that, and I remember her writing a blog post about it. Her name's Katie Chappell. She's an amazing illustrator. And yeah, I was like, you know what, I'm going to do this and I'm going to talk about it, because one of the other things that I realized is, like, the place that I go to in my head is assuming that I'm the only person going through this negative thing in my business, and that everybody else, because often people are just sharing their highlight reels online, understandably, I just assume, well, no one else is dealing with this. It's just me. I'm the worst. Everything's terrible. We often have quite a negativity bias. And so I was like, I'm going to talk about it because I want other people to know that this is actually just really normal. And it's just part of the process of running a business, of being creative, of just life, basically. And it doesn't have to be this like huge scary thing. If we are expecting it and if we are prepared for it, it's so much easier to deal with when it happens. And one of the things that I would say is, it was never about getting rid of the negative emotions. Like, I didn't ever think that I would stop being disappointed if I got rejection, but what it was about was recovering faster. It was like that failing faster, like recovering faster and moving on to the next thing, not letting it be this story that I tell myself that isn't true, like, I'm the worst, they don't like me, they think I'm bad at my job, all these sort of stories that we tell ourselves. But also just to like make the process fun. So I turned it into, I gamified it, turned it into this win-win scenario. And the mindset shift was immediate, because all of a sudden I was just like, the possibilities are like endless, because I can go out there, confidently ask people for what I want, and I've made myself this win-win scenario. So if they say no, I just, rack up another rejection for my challenge. So yeah, that was kind of the concept behind it all. And I originally set myself the timeline of 6 months to try and get 100, and I'm nearly 3 years on, and I'm still nowhere near close to that. Yeah. People kept saying yes, which was amazing.
That is incredible, because I think that speaks volumes. First of all, there's a lot to unpack there. So I really wanted to talk about how you shifted from seeing this negativity to seeing opportunity, because that is huge. And there's a psychological thing, because I'm big into psychology. I really love it. I'm growing a passion for it. Thank you, Robin, for getting me addicted on it. But there is a psychological thing that takes place when you buy a new car, and your car is a bright, shiny red car, and you have a certain kind of car, you'll start to see them everywhere. Like when you buy a new car and it's a red car and it's whatever make and model, you'll see them everywhere. And this goes back to our tribal brain. Back in the caveman days, when we used to have to forage for food and fight for survival, our brain would seek out patterns and recollection and things like that. So if you're constantly feeding yourself like, I'm the worst, I'm terrible, I'm this, you will start to believe that, and it will affect everything in your life. But if you can pivot and start to look for that opportunity, failing faster to get better, your brain will start to seek out opportunity and growth potential. And that is huge in and of itself. So I'm really glad that you said that. And just in general, I think that it's really important what you said about you're never going to get rid of that emotion. The rejection challenge isn't that you stop feeling pain when you get rejected. I think that sting is never going to go away. When you get a no, it is always going to sting, like right in your chest, like you were saying. It's not like emotional. You're not going to cry over it, but it stings for a little bit. And being able to recover from that quicker is everything. It's like weight training. You're able to recover from lifting weights quicker and quicker and quicker the more that you do it every day. And it's no different. It's just a mental exercise instead of a physical one. So I think that that's really important to note is even if you are doing your own rejection challenge and you're trying to kind of fail faster, don't be under this impression that it's going to go away. It's never going to go away, but you are going to learn how to properly put together coping mechanisms and that recovery system where you can just bounce back from it quicker. It no longer affects your week or your month or whatever it is. You can recover so much faster. So I'm really glad that you said it in that way because I think there can be a misconception there.
Yeah, I think often a lot of life, we've sort of grown up being told that happiness isn't the goal and that like positive emotions is the goal. And I think often, I was actually talking to a client of mine about this recently on her podcast, and she was saying that she thinks our expectations are skewed of like the percentage of sort of like positive emotions versus negative emotions, or happiness versus I don't know, non-happiness. And I think that's it. I think it's having all of the emotions and it's expecting all of the emotions, but so much of it is not about the actual feeling and the actual emotion that we experience. It's about then how we choose to deal with that going forward. And I think that's where there's a lot of power that we can have as like individuals, as humans, because we can change how we think about that and we can control that aspect of it. We can't really control the sort of like, initial gut feeling that we have, but we can then make a choice about how we deal with it. And like you said, we tell ourselves these stories and they almost become self-fulfilling because we believe them if we say them to ourselves enough. And I think, going back to your point about running a business and getting to know yourself, I think there has to be a lot of self-reflection if you want to be able to break those stories, because the first part of it is acknowledging they're there. And it took that initial rejection to almost like open my eyes to the negative stories that I was telling myself, where I was suddenly like, hang on a second. And then once I had that realization, then I could do something about it. And it's not comfortable. Like another big thing that I talk about a lot is like I've had to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, because none of this is particularly I mean, it'll be different for everybody. Like none of it's particularly enjoyable necessarily, but it feels so good when you start to break those patterns and you start to build new ones and you start to see the changes. And one of the things that was really interesting to me was, as I was doing the challenge, people started coming to me with the opportunities that I had put on. So a bit like you with your manifesting that client, like you were like, this is going to be my next client. I had made a list of all of the things I was going to pitch to and get rejected for. And some of them started approaching me before I even had a chance to pitch to them. And I think the reason I think that was because by doing the challenge, it gave me this like new confidence to show up in a way that I hadn't shown up before. So because I was kind of like less stressed about the outcome, like there was just so much less pressure on how I like showed up and how I did it. And so I just automatically showed up more confidently. And I think that sort of drew people in and they noticed, and then they started to approach me for opportunities, which again is another excuse as to why I haven't hit my goal. But yeah, that was really interesting as well.
That's incredible. And that is powerful in and of itself, because I noticed that, when I was first kind of showing up and trying to talk to clients, I was so afraid of the no. I was so afraid of it. So I would close my shoulders off and hunch my head down and talk really quiet and be so nervous on these calls. But the thing is, we are creatures of habit and we can pick up on body language, even if we don't know that we can. And I learned this because I started to learn body language intentionally. A lot of times when I have clients on calls, I said I record everything, and I do, because I need to get a record of everything that was discussed, so I'm not missing like revisions or whatever it is that we talked about. I also want to assess myself, and then last but not least, I look at their body language, because oftentimes when you're going through a branding process with a client, they could be saying something but mean something else. And for this, I experienced it with CJ's. You know, they were kind of saying this one thing, but I noticed in their body language, they weren't really like sure about what was said. And I could pick up on that and be like, okay, they were asking for this change, but they didn't really mean it that way. So I interpreted it my own way and made the change, which they were in love with. So we went from, we don't like anything that we saw, to we love it in all caps, because I was able to kind of read their body language and things like that. So when you're in front of a client and you're really closed off and you're afraid of the no and you're kind of like almost flinching because you're scared of it, they're picking up on that body language. And when you're not confident in yourself, your client will also not be confident in you. But if you are confident in yourself, your client will be confident in you as well. And that is so powerful, because that took me the entire first 2 years in business to learn. You know, initially I was so scared, and are they going to say no to the proposal? Are they going to say no at this point? Are they going to say they don't like everything? But when you put enough practices in place, contracts, onboarding processes, things like that, you kind of almost guide them through this entire process. And it doesn't feel as scary for you, and it doesn't feel as scary for them. You know, the more confident you can get with yourself, both speaking and in your processes and how you run your business, it just shows through so much. Like, I had a call this summer and somebody was asking about branding, and I gave them the whole rundown. I said about my inquiry process and onboarding process and working and offboarding and app rate board and all that kind of stuff. And they were like, how long have you been running your business? And I said, you know, not even 2 years. And they said, by the way, I held myself and talked about my process and outlined all the steps and told them what was included. They thought I was in business for 10 years. And if you can gain that kind of confidence up front with somebody, they're going to trust you through the whole process. And I think that really just leads back to the podcast too, where now I have clients finding my podcast online and listening to me talk about design and listening to the hard lessons learned and how I changed and how I adapted. And when they understand that you're capable of that, they really, really do trust you.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, what an absolute compliment for them to say that, and to notice it. And I think you're totally right. And also, you know, another sort of thing that I think has really helped with confidence for me is the podcast, because it's a real skill to be able to articulate what you want to say clearly. And, you know, I'm still learning for sure, but having that many interviews and chatting to that many people, like, you get more confident doing that. And I definitely think that the podcast has like helped with the public speaking, you know, like it all sort of feeds into each other. And it all helps you to become a more confident business owner, and that impacts like all aspects of your business in a really positive way. And I think, you know, it doesn't have to be a podcast, but I think there's ways to do that. You know, there's lots of different ways to do that, but I think it comes back to that pushing yourself where you feel a bit uncomfortable. So like, I know a lot of people are put off podcasting because they hate the sound of their own voice, and it's like you have to push through that and then get used to it. Or, you know, like a lot of people really struggle with reels because they don't want to show up on camera. And I'm not saying that you like have to jump straight in, but there's like little steps that you can take, you know, where it feels a bit uncomfortable, but you do that one thing and then that becomes easy, and then you do the next thing and then that becomes easy. So I think, yeah, it's hard. It's hard for sure, but very, very satisfying and very rewarding when you can see your growth, and when other people start to notice it as well. Like, that must have been so cool, you know, when you've got prospective clients who are noticing the work that you've put in over the last 2 years, and how that's showing up in your onboarding calls. Like, that's awesome.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you saying that. And it is just overall, I love that you outlined the baby steps, because for me, I was always a person that wanted to go from A to Z immediately without having to go through the whole alphabet. But those baby steps are so important. And for me, when I started my podcast, it was doing it in a dark room with nobody else. And I didn't even have my video on. It was just me and a microphone, and that was it. And that was very uncomfortable. And as that became more comfortable, I thought to myself, well, let me try turning my camera on. And it was extremely uncomfortable. And the first couple ones I didn't even use, but I kept doing it. And there was a point where it was like I did a couple with video on and I didn't post them. And then I did one without video. I was like backtracking and I was like, no, you got to keep pushing. So then I turned my video back on, because at that point I knew I wanted to try to have on my first guest. And I was like, I need to make sure that the video is good and it's not choppy. And like, I need to make sure, like, do an actual system test before I have my first guest on. So I pushed myself and I did my first couple like solo episodes with the video. And then I had on my first guest, and it was a girl that I went to high school with. So it felt very safe, and she's running her own business, only about an hour away from me, and she's a photographer. So we had this little bit of a creative connection. We went to high school together. I felt very safe around her. She knew me personally. And that was the first guest that I brought on. I feel like if I had you on as my first guest, it would not be this cohesive of a podcast. So I think it's very important to kind of bring to light that this does have to go in steps, and it does go in phases, and you will see your growth progress, but you can't shortcut it. Haste makes waste. So I really am glad that you brought that up, because it's very important. It's easy to overlook it when you see everybody posting their highlight reels and their wins and their awards and conferences and all this kind of stuff. It can get discouraging, and it can kind of feel like you're falling short, but growth is a journey. It's not a sprint. It's a marathon, not a race. So I'm really glad that you kind of brought that up. And I wanted to ask a little bit about your business, and how you've kind of grown in your business, the kind of clients that you like to work with, and really what it is that you're looking to achieve in the world.
Yeah, I think for me, as I mentioned before, like, small business owners is the thing that gets me really excited, is supporting them in their kind of business growth. And I think part of that, so when I was still working, so I was in an in-house design team for quite a long time, and I basically started my own hobby business on the side, which was designing stationery. So I would design my own stationery and I'd sell it at markets. And what was nice about it is that it was like design but without a client, and so I could just do what I wanted to do, and then if people wanted to buy it, great, and if they didn't, it wasn't like hugely risky, because obviously I had a 9 to 5. But what that did was it basically brought me into this world of and community of like designer makers and people, who were doing incredibly creative things and running their own businesses. And I just fell in love with that group of people. And like, just those independent businesses. I mean, small business isn't even, I think technically they'd be considered micro businesses, but it's those people who it's either them or they've got a small team. And so when I sort of went all in on the service side of my business, it made so much sense for me to focus on them as a target, like, customer, or client, because I kind of knew what their struggles were, because I'd lived it. I was one of them. And so, yeah, and I just think I have seen firsthand, like, throughout my career, the impact that good design has on people and their confidence. And like, my absolute favorite thing is just seeing that transformation. And again, like, this comes from personal experience. I don't know if you have this, but I know a lot of designers struggle with working on their own brand and their own website and all that kind of thing, because they're so busy focusing on client stuff. And I remember I neglected my website for years, and it was horrible, and I literally cringed at the thought of sending anyone to it. And I knew that other people were feeling the same way. And so I wanted to be that person that helped them to feel so proud about sending people to their website, showing people their brand. Like, I think, it really does help you show up in the world. Like, it can really transform how you show up and how you present your business if you're feeling good about all of those aspects, about how it looks. And it just helps. I mean, ultimately, it helps you make money. It helps you communicate what you do more effectively. And so, yeah, that's what I get really excited about. I've worked in a more corporate setting, and that doesn't really excite me that much. Like, you know, like I totally get for some people, like that's it, and they want to have a big impact and they want to work in a huge company, and that's great. For me, it's more about those like individual relationships where I can like, you know, work one-on-one with someone. You know, if you work with my business, I am the person that you're going to work with. I build that relationship with them. A lot of my clients end up becoming really good friends, and I, you know, stay in touch with them after the project. Like that's what gets me really excited, rather than, you know, being part, like a small cog in a massive team. Not saying that there's anything wrong with that. So that's kind of how my business has like grown and evolved. Obviously, there are some kind of like struggles with that, which is that my ideal client often has a much smaller budget than you know, if I was working with big corporates. And so the way that I've kind of got around that is kind of diversified my income a bit so that it's not all dependent on client work. So I work with brands. I sometimes have podcast sponsors. I mean, that doesn't bring in loads of money, but you know, like doing other projects. I've done quite a bit of work with Adobe. They have much bigger budget, so that almost like subsidizes me being able to work with the clients that I want to work with. So yeah, that's kind of how my business looks these days.
That is incredible. And I could just tell how passionate you are by the way that your tone changed when you were talking about your business, because I can relate to that so much. I think that lens where you kind of felt embarrassed about your website, because I'm currently there. I'm in the process of rebranding and I'm going very slow, but currently like I'm not thrilled with my website, and it's that little bit of embarrassment where you're kind of embarrassed to send people there and you know that it needs work. And in the same way that we've gained confidence through our podcasts and through our own professional self-development, rejection challenges, podcasts, and we've kind of gained that confidence that really transformed our lives in our own unique ways, I think that same concept applies when a client is able to get that brand that makes them feel confident, that they can be proud of, that they're happy to wear a shirt and represent a shirt like it's their favorite sports team. That level of confidence radiates off of them. And just the same as when we find our own self-worth and our own inner confidence, and our clients pick up on that and they want to work with us, if we're working with, you know, craft people or service-based, like home service type people, whoever the client is, when they gain that newfound self-confidence and that confidence in their brand, that radiates, and their prospective clients want to work with them. So it just becomes this beautiful, like, full circle experience where we find our own confidence. We're able to give that to small businesses. They can go out into the world and be confident and draw people in. And it's this incredible growth. Like, I really hope to see a revival in small businesses. I do. I think we're right on the precipice of it. I think we're so close to that tipping point where we're really going to see this revival of small business. I think it's going to be huge. I think it's going to be really cool to be a part of, and just to be able to sit down with people like you and other people in the industry, and Vicky Moore and Robin and Vicky's co-working calls, to be able to be a part of that community, whether you're 10 years, 15 years, 20 years into the business, or you started yesterday. I think there is such an incredible thing happening right now in our industry where the seasoned veterans and the newcomers alike just want to see everybody win. You know, there's enough food at the table for all of us. I feel like at this point, competition really is dead because we're all in our own niche, you know? And I just think that it's a really incredible thing. And I'm so thankful that you were willing to come and be on my podcast and share your uniqueness with my audience and have such an incredible conversation about everything.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I mean, I've loved it. You're very easy to talk to and you're a great interviewer. So thank you.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I was so nervous. And on one of the co-working calls I mentioned, I was like, I'm going to have Liz Mosley on my podcast, guys. I'm so nervous. And Robin was like, oh my gosh, Liz, you're fine. If you clam up, she'll chat on for you.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Good. I'm glad Robin reassured you.
So I was like, okay, at least maybe I don't have to be as nervous. But this is important. This is what we're talking about right here. get comfortable being uncomfortable, get nervous. Beautiful, incredible, amazing things will come of it, and you will thank yourself when you look back. So before I forget, can you tell everybody that's interested in reaching out, following you, potentially working with you, where they can find you online and on social media?
Yeah, sure. So on social media, I'm at Liz M. Mosley. So at Liz M. Mosley. On like websites, you can find my podcast on buildingyourbrand.net. And then my website for my design stuff is lizmosley.net. So yeah, come check it all out.
Awesome. Well, go find her online. Liz is a wonderful person. I have really enjoyed this conversation. And thank you so, so much again for being willing to be on the show.
Oh, absolute pleasure.
All right. I'll see everybody in next week's episode. Thanks so much for tuning in. Bye.